Tupperware. So here's my mold, and I want to demold it. So the thing I want to do, in this case, it's a relatively simple shape. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to very gently pull apart the mold from the edges here. Okay. And then I'm going to try to kind of just gently release it from the mold and kind of letting it come out. This may or may not work in your case, but there we go. And there's my original. And so what's kind of cool about this process is that you end up with a pretty cool looking, end product. Let me see if I can get it a little bit closer so you guys can see. So it does actually have quite a lot of the detail on there still. Let's see if I can get that to focus in a little bit better. See? And so I didn't have any undercut. So what this represents, this part right here represents, is that's the part that would have been the undercut, which might not have been bad actually, but I didn't want to have to struggle to get the object out. So I wanted to show you guys how to fill the negative space in between the object. And so it is literally a version of this. So you can see that this blob right there is the same blob as the as the glue. And what I'd like you guys to do is create at least 10 of these type of objects. Now at this point, since it's still wet, what you can do at this point is this is the point at which you're going to want to take a sculpture tool or a knife, because this is where the hydrostone is the most pliable and manipulatable. It still has a high moisture content, which means it will be kind of fragile. But you don't want to break. You want to crack your beautiful sculpture that you've been working on. Now in this case, I kind of wish I'd left the undercut to give it a little more interest. But in this case, let's just pretend I'm thinking, I just want to have a kind of a decorative surface on something. And maybe the artwork that I'm going to create is going to have this kind of costume jewelry effect, on it somehow. It could be a decorative piece, or it could be something that I color, right? But there we go, and there's the mold, okay? And that's a 1-part mold. Hey guys, Gilbert again. So check it out. I have tidied up a little bit, and what I'm doing right here is I'm just kind of cleaning up the mold a little bit. What I wanted to show you guys is how I work with the 1-part mold, and then I'll go over how to make a 2-part mold. Again, the 1-part mold, I'm just going to pour in flat this way. And if you find that it's sitting kind of crooked, you can just trim off the edge. Okay. And I don't ordinarily work this way, but I'm just doing this for the demo. In other words, I just put a little bit of plaster in this cup right here. I have some gravel from a project that I was working on, and I also have some smaller mixing cups. And then over here I've got my water, so I'm kind of ready to go. Ordinarily what I like to do is put something down to protect my surface, but this is my working table, so I don't really care. I just sand it down, So here's what I do with this gravel stuff. It's I would go to like a train store or like a hobby shop or maybe Michael's, and they might have some of this stuff. Woodland Scenics sells it. And what I'd like to do when I'm dealing with small molds is just kind of fill up the mold a little bit, and that's going to give me an idea about how much material I should use, right? So the volume, more or less, is about that much in terms of the material. Obviously it's going to be a little bit less because there's going to be some spaces in between the gravel. However, that's going to help me gauge how much material I should mix. I could mix it in here, and I might as well, since it'd probably be easier to see. And again, I'm using some disposable silverware that I got from the from any, like a fast food. I could also just mix it in there, which might be easy, but since you guys don't have this, I just thought I would just do it like this for you guys. So always what I do is I add the water first, okay, to my bucket. And then what I do, in this case, I'm just going to use a little spoon because I don't need very much. I'm going to kind of sprinkle it around. And what the sprinkling it around does is it allows the mixture to sneak in between the particulate of the plaster. And it can minimize bubbles later. So I'm just going to kind of fill that up until I get some islands forming. Now in this case, since my mold is pretty detailed, I want to make sure I have a pretty good mix of the material in the water. I don't necessarily need it to be super thick. The thicker the material is that you mix, the less likely or less, there's my dog here, less likely you'll be able to get the bubbles out. So for example, let's set this over here. This is a pretty thin mixture, and I'm going to kind of let the sediment come down. Ordinarily, I would mix it a little bit thicker, but since this is kind of a detailed part, I'm just going to go ahead and just keep it kind of thin. And I just want to make sure all the lumps and glumps are out of it. Okay. And then I'm going to give it a little bump and let the plaster kind of take its own course in terms of getting the bubbles out. You can blow on it to pop the bubbles from the surface tension. But what I like to do is, because this is a really thin mixture, bumping it down gets the heavier materials down, and then I'm just going to go ahead and pour it in there. Okay, whoop. So you can see I probably mixed twice as much. It was really easy. This is Hydrostone. You could also use Hydrocal, which is also a gypsum-based plaster. Hydrocal and Hydrostone in particular are extremely, they have a really high durometer, like really super hard. The Hydrostone is kind of cool because it doesn't ordinarily absorb or get affected by the water that it doesn't need. It just uses the water it needs to harden, and then the rest of it will pool on top, or it'll kind of kick it out. This is the exact reason why you should never ever clean your stuff in your sink, because the plaster will set up underwater, and that means you will not be able to snake it out or dissolve it out with acids. You will have to change your plumbing. So please do create a separate bucket with some water so that you can do a pre-cleanup, and then once everything's more or less taken care of, then you can use your sink to wash your hands. So what I'm going to do here is I usually give it a little bump. And what you saw me doing earlier was, with my tool, I could also use a chopstick or a toothpick or whatever. I'm just kind of touching the surface of the mold, because more often than not, the objects that we cast have the residues of being handled, which is oils from our skin. It could even be just environmental dust and stuff like that, which will prevent and create a kind of a surface tension between the mold itself and the plaster. So all I'm doing is I'm just trying to agitate it a little bit to break up the surface tension, if any, and maximize my chances of getting some decent detail. Now you can see these little bubbles coming up. That's because I had actually figured out there was some surface tension down there, and I'm just kind of gently brushing the surface of all that detail from that costume jewelry, and you can see what's happening. It's releasing a lot of the bubbles. If I have a bubble in my mold, you'll see later that it'll show up as a negative space. So I'm going to let this set. I feel pretty good about it in terms of the bubbles, but we'll just see. So I usually do the shaky shake for a little bit, and then what you can do is you can use a stick or a popsicle stick, and I usually just wipe it off back into my box. Sorry, my bowl there. And now what I can do is I can just wait for this to set up, and we'll come back and check it out in about a half an hour. In warm climates, you're probably going to only need to wait about 30 minutes, 20 minutes. In cold and damp, it may take a bit longer. You can also accelerate the curing of this with hot water, but be mindful that when it kicks off, it really goes fast. Okay, guys, I'll catch up with you next.